Hello there. If you think we have Brexit in name only now, just see what the Labour Party will do with Keir Starmer in number 10. The fight for UK independence is never ever over, especially while Tony Blair and Keir Starmer are around. Tony Blair still has influence and he is still fighting against Brexit. He wants Labour to reset UK relations with the EU when they get into power. And we can all guess what Blair means by reset. Now, there will always be a group of globalists out there that dreams of the day when the UK becomes a mere parish area of a European or even worldwide Marxist community. So along toddles Tony Blair to keep the globalist dreams alive. And be in no doubt, the name Tony Blair still carries huge weight in the Labour Party, whatever the party hierarchy might tell you. So when that massively Europhile Blair says that when Labour gets into power, Keir Starmer must push the UK as close to the EU as he can, you better believe that push will come. And David Lammy, the Labour Shadow Foreign Secretary, is dribbling at the prospect that he could end up attending EU Foreign Minister meetings. So, according to Blair, a Labour administration must reset the UK's relationship with the EU into even more of a brino. Brilliant. But I must say that I don't think Blair realises that the people of the UK have cottoned on to how the EU works. Whenever you negotiate with the EU, it's always a case of give and take. Yes, we give and they take. And from what I can see, Keir Starmer wants to negotiate a deal with the EU on defence and foreign policy, another on veterinary rules governing food trade, and another on migration and asylum seekers. And if he thinks he can get some sort of equal deal with the bloc, then, as the saying goes, I've got a bridge to sell him. Now, while Blair is manoeuvring to get the UK firmly back inside the EU by the back door, even if we are just mere rule takers under ECJ jurisdiction, the Labour Party is trying to convince us that there are Labour red lines that will not be crossed, like not joining the EU customs union or single market, nor allowing freedom of movement. And they will point to their recent pronouncement that they will follow the Tory lead of rejecting the very recent EU offer of free movement of people between 18 and 30 years of age. But what would happen, though, when Labour does get into power and the EU magically comes up with a modified offer? An offer of free movement allowing the EU to export its youth unemployment into the UK. Would Starmer then agree to it? Now, the UK does have a chance to renegotiate the Brexit trade deal in 2025, as that's when it's up for review. But to show you how badly the Tories handled the negotiations, the EU doesn't want to change anything in it. They are very happy with it. And they've already told Keir Starmer that Brussels is not in the mood to talk. Labour has scaled back plans for a quick renegotiation of the Brexit trade deal after it was snubbed by the European Union, reported the Telegraph in March. But Starmer had already told the FT that as we go into 2025, we will attempt to get a much better deal for the UK. I think there's more that can be achieved across the board. But then he found out that Brussels isn't interested in any amendments that make it a better deal for the UK. So it's obvious that the EU would only agree to open the contract up to debate if there was something in Labour's proposals that was very, very generous and beneficial to the Brussels Eurocrats. So if we do end up hearing about Brexit deal renegotiation in 2025, we will know that Starmer has made the EU an extremely generous and UK defeating offer. And then get ready for lots of UK give and lots of EU take. Now, Tony Blair, through his Institute for Global Change, exerts a lot of influence. boasting 800 people in 40 governments with 110 million quid a year in revenues, with the Times saying his organisation has big outposts in Abu Dhabi, Nairobi and Singapore, and has plans for one in Washington. Forget his plans to be the President of the European Union. At this rate, Blair's on track to become world emperor. Anyway, Tony Blair will be as aware of all of this as anyone else is, but he will still be pressing for the UK to get as deeply embroiled in the EU as he can get us. Because if he can get us to become a disadvantaged EU rule taker, it makes it much easier to make the case for re-entry, and in so doing, taking the euro on and joining the Schengen free travel area. And once in the Eurozone, it will be almost impossible to leave the EU, i.e. we'd be in an even worse position than when we were full members of the EU. And I'm sure that Blair would be extremely keen to get the UK Foreign Office to buckle to EU requirements, and he will be for putting our military under Brussels control. And I'm sure he's pushing Starmer in this direction. Now, the Labour Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, says we need to get closer to the EU to help her plan to deal with the small boat crossings. Writing in the Telegraph, she says we need urgent action to stop this perilous criminal trade and to strengthen Britain's borders. And she says she'll put the Rwanda money into strengthening our border security instead. That means new counter-terror style powers, new international intelligence sharing agreements, and new cross-border police working with European partners to smash the criminal gang networks and stop the boats reaching the French coast in the first place. We've already heard all of this from Rishi, and some would ask what the EU would want in return for all of that. A full asylum seeker sharing policy, perhaps. And Cooper went on to say that we would clear the asylum seeker backlog with a new fast-track system for safe countries, end asylum hotel use, and set up a major new returns and enforcement unit to swiftly return those with no right to be in the UK. Fast-track asylum system. For fast-track, I read rubber stamp. That's one way of clearing the backlog, isn't it? And when rubber stamped, whose house will they live in? And I reckon any major new returns and enforcement unit would quickly morph into a grand resettlement in the UK scheme. Just like Border Force and the RNLI were morphed away from their core tasks into a free Channel ferry service. Now, you may have heard that Rishi Sunak has announced today that the Rwanda bill will be forced through the Lords tonight, and the flights will get off the ground in 10 to 12 weeks. No more prevarication, no more delay, he stated, claiming to have put 25 courts, 150 judges and 500 staff in place, all being audited for performance. We will have a successful rhythm of physically and permanently deporting people that no foreign court can stop, he said. But he's having to keep the nuts and bolts of the plans secret in order to foil the Open Borders Brigade, that vocal minority group of activists who do all they can to stop every single deportation. And Sunak thinks he can stop the pro-immigration Home Office officials from leaking the nuts and bolts details like a sieve to all and sundry pro-immigration activists and lawyers, does he? Yeah. And then there's the matter of the Human Rights Act that put the whole of the European Convention of Human Rights into UK law, making it fully enforceable. And he hasn't repealed that, let alone left the ECHR itself. And our courts will, of course, follow that. No need for a foreign court to stop the flights. In 10 to 12 weeks' time, we will see flight after flight failing to leave the ground as the seats are emptied by UK court order. I do hope I'm wrong, though.